The imperial throne of the Avarian Imperium wasn't merely furniture, it was a statement. Carved from a single Proximan diamond crystal, it refracted light across the vast audience chamber. Only one being was permitted to sit upon it. Empress Thalia Voss observed the proceedings with practiced detachment, her silver eyes revealing nothing. 56 worlds hung on her every word, their fates determined by the slightest gesture of her fingers. Her lavender-tinted skin shimmered with embedded microtechnology that monitored her vitals and deflected most weapons. "Next case," she commanded, her voice melodic but cold. Imperial Guard Captain Elias stepped forward. "Your Radiance, we've apprehended a human trespasser in the Halcyon sector. His vessel was discovered in restricted space near the military development zone." "Bring him forward," she ordered. The guards marched in a man whose appearance disrupted the chamber's atmosphere. His dark hair was tied back haphazardly, and his weathered flight jacket bore patches from a dozen worlds. Though his wrists were bound, he walked with the casual confidence of someone strolling into a favorite tavern. When he raised his head to look at her, Thalia felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: surprise. Most beings couldn't meet her gaze for more than seconds, yet this human not only maintained eye contact but had the audacity to smile. "Your guards have excellent taste in accommodations," he said before anyone could speak. The cell was spotless, though the menu options were limited. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Nobody addressed the Empress directly without permission. "You stand before Empress Thalia Voss, supreme ruler of the Avarian Imperium, protector of the 56 worlds," Captain Elias barked. "You will show proper respect or—" Thalia raised her hand, silencing him instantly. "You know the penalty for unauthorized entry into military-restricted zones is death," she said. "Seems excessive for a navigation error," he replied. "I'm Kieran Blackwood, cargo hauler. The Halcyon asteroid field has a beautiful gravitational corridor that cuts 3 days off the outer rim route." "You're lying," Thalia said flatly. "Your ship contains hidden compartments. You're a smuggler." Kieran's smile widened. "I prefer independent logistics specialist." Thalia descended the crystalline steps from her throne, an unprecedented action. The court watched in stunned silence as she approached him. Even without her elevated position, she stood nearly a head taller than him. "In 50 years of rule, no one has stood before me with such disregard for protocol," she said softly. "Do you not fear death, Kieran Blackwood?" "I respect death, your radiance," Kieran replied, "but fear doesn't make for a good final conversation." She circled him slowly. "Your ship manifest indicates you've visited systems with minimal diplomatic relations with the Imperium." "I go where the work takes me." "And what did you see in these systems?" she asked, stopping before him. "The Centauri Alliance is preparing for something," he said quietly. "Not officially, but the signs are there if you know where to look." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Centauri Alliance was the Imperium's oldest rival. "Captain Elias," she said, "the prisoner's ship, have intelligence analyze everything." She returned to her throne in one fluid motion. "Kieran Blackwood, I should sentence you to immediate execution. However, I find your particular skills potentially valuable. Therefore, I commute your death sentence to service to the Crown." "And if I decline this generous offer?" Kieran asked. "That option remains death, of course." "Then I gratefully accept your Radiance's mercy," he replied with a bow that somehow seemed both respectful and mocking. As Thalia passed through the private exit, she allowed herself one backward glance at the human. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was curious about what tomorrow might bring. Thalia's private chambers were a stark contrast to the opulent throne room. Here, functionality dominated: sleek surfaces, advanced technology, and simple elegance without frivolous ornamentation. She discarded her ceremonial attire and coronet, donning a fitted bodysuit that allowed her enhanced body freedom to move. "Display intelligence report on prisoner Kieran Blackwood," she commanded. The chamber's walls shimmered as data cascaded around her. Criminal records from multiple systems appeared, alongside shipping manifests and fragmented surveillance captures. Kieran had evaded detailed documentation, but patterns emerged: smuggling operations that specialized in artifacts and information rather than weapons or narcotics. Most interestingly, several worlds reported him for smuggling medical supplies to blockaded populations. A chime announced her cousin's arrival. Admiral Dorian Voss entered with military precision, his uniform impeccable. As commander of the Imperial fleet, he was one of few with direct access to her private quarters. "Cousin," he said with a formal bow, "the human's ship has yielded interesting findings." "Proceed." His navigational data confirms presence in Centauri border systems. More importantly, we found encrypted communications that, once decoded, reveal intelligence on fleet movements consistent with his claims. The Centauri are indeed mobilizing resources. Thalia nodded, her suspicions confirmed. And the artifacts? Actually stolen from private collectors who acquired them illegally, Dorian admitted with visible distaste. He was returning them to their worlds of origin, for a fee, of course. "A principled criminal," she mused. "Arrange quarters for him near my personal guard. I want him accessible for questioning." Dorian's expression darkened. "A palace residence for a smuggler, the council will object." "The council doesn't command here," she replied coolly. "This human sees things our formal intelligence networks miss. I intend to exploit that advantage." "As you wish, Your Radiance," he said, bowing again before departing. The following days established a new rhythm. Each morning, Thalia summoned Kieran to accompany her security detail during diplomatic meetings. While her guards watched for physical threats, she instructed him to observe for subtler dangers: deception, hidden alliances, unreported conflicts. Minister Zan's aide keeps touching his communication implant when the Rigelian ambassador speaks, Kieran noted during one debrief in her study. And the trade delegate from Vega Prime has marriage markings from two different houses, likely playing both sides. "You notice unusual details," Thalia remarked, watching him examine her collection of ancient star charts. "In my line of work, missing details gets you killed or imprisoned." He traced a constellation pattern with his finger. "Or standing before beautiful, terrifying empresses." She stiffened. "You will address me properly." "I am addressing you honestly," he replied, meeting her gaze. "Isn't that more valuable than empty honorifics? Everyone else tells you what they think you want to hear." No one in her lifetime had spoken to her this way. It was both infuriating and refreshing. "You're playing a dangerous game," she warned. "Life's too short not to," he replied with that infernal smile. Days became weeks. Despite her better judgment, Thalia found herself seeking his company beyond security briefings. He told stories of worlds she ruled but had never truly seen, describing vibrant markets and cultural festivals her formal visits had always bypassed. Meanwhile, Dorian watched with growing concern. When a routine security sweep discovered surveillance devices in the Empress's chambers, his suspicions deepened. The transmissions were encoded with Centauri encryption, the same enemy Kieran had so conveniently warned them about. "Your human pet may be playing you," Dorian cautioned during an emergency security briefing. "These devices match technology found on his ship." "You suggest he's a Centauri agent?" Thalia asked. "I suggest caution, cousin. Perhaps test his loyalty." That night, as Thalia worked late in her study, a shadow moved across her balcony. Within seconds, her guards subdued the intruder, an assassin with Centauri military augmentations. As she stared at the captured operative, a chilling realization formed. The game had changed, and Kieran Blackwood might be her most valuable player or her deadliest vulnerability. "This is an unnecessary risk," Captain Elias insisted as the Imperial shuttle prepared for departure. "The diplomatic summit could be handled by ministers after the assassination attempt." "Which is precisely why I must attend personally," Thalia countered. "The Centauri will interpret my absence as fear or weakness." The summit on neutral territory, the ancient trading hub of Nexus Station, would gather representatives from all major galactic powers. Following the captured assassin's interrogation, which had revealed a larger conspiracy but few specifics, security had been tripled. "Your new shadow seems comfortable with Imperial transportation," Elias remarked, nodding toward Kieran, who was inspecting the shuttle's exterior with professional interest. Thalia followed his gaze. "He identified vulnerabilities in our previous vessel's design. This one incorporates his suggestions." "You trust him that much?" "I trust his survival instinct," she replied. His fate is now tied to mine. The journey passed in tense silence. Kieran had been assigned as a special security consultant, much to the traditional guard's dismay. He wore a modified Imperial uniform that accommodated a variety of hidden tools he'd insisted upon carrying. As they approached their quarters on Nexus Station, Kieran suddenly pushed Thalia against the wall, covering her body with his as he drew a concealed weapon. The guards reacted instantly, training weapons on him. "Stand down," he said quietly. "Scan the ceiling duct, third junction." One guard aimed a scanner upward. "Explosive device," motion triggered. "Your security team needs better advanced protocols," Kieran said, slowly releasing her. Thalia felt the lingering warmth where his body had pressed against hers, an unfamiliar sensation that distracted her momentarily from the danger. "How did you know?" "Dust pattern on the floor, recent maintenance in an area not listed on the station logs," he shrugged. "Small details." Later that night, after security had swept their diplomatic quarters multiple times, Thalia found herself alone with Kieran on the observation deck. Nexus Station's position offered spectacular views of converging nebulae that painted the void in breathtaking colors. "You saved my life today," she said, breaking the silence. "Just earning my commuted sentence," he replied, but his usual glibness seemed forced. "Why didn't you run? You've had opportunities." He turned to face her. "Maybe I'm curious about how this story ends." "And what story is that?" "The one where the untouchable Empress meets someone who sees the woman beneath the crown." Thalia stepped closer, her enhanced biology detecting his quickened pulse. "There is no difference. I was engineered to rule. The woman and the Empress are one." "No one is just one thing," Kieran said softly. "I've watched you these past weeks. When you think no one's looking, there are moments, just flashes when you're something else, something more." "And what am I in those moments?" she asked, surprised by the vulnerability in her own voice. "Lonely," he answered simply. The word struck her like physical blow. In 50 years of rule, no one had dared name the emptiness she carried. "What would you know of an empress's loneliness?" she challenged. "Nothing," he admitted, "but I recognize solitude when I see it. The stars and I have been companions for a long time." Something shifted between them, a boundary crossed. When his hand tentatively reached for hers, she didn't pull away. "There's a celebration in the station's lower markets tonight," he said. "No imperial protocols, no assassins, no politics, just people living their lives. Would you like to see it? Just for an hour." Every rational thought argued against it, but for once, Thalia silenced the Empress's voice and listened to the woman's. "How would we even leave without guards?" Kieran smiled, not his usual smirk, but something genuine that transformed his face. "Smuggler, remember? Undetected movement is my specialty." Hours later, disguised in civilian clothes, Thalia experienced the intoxicating freedom of anonymity among the station's vibrant night market. They shared exotic foods from street vendors, listened to music unlike any permitted in the imperial courts, and for the first time in her life, Thalia laughed without restraint. When they returned to her quarters before dawn, something fundamental had changed. As the door closed behind them, Kieran's hand brushed her cheek with unexpected tenderness. "This is treason," she whispered as their bodies gravitated closer. "Then condemn me tomorrow," he murmured against her lips. The Empress surrendered to the woman, and for one night, Thalia Voss learned what it meant to be simply human. Morning arrived with cruel efficiency. Thalia woke to find Kieran already dressed, staring at a communication terminal with grave intensity. "Something's wrong," he said without preamble. "Imperial communications channels have gone silent." Thalia activated her secure link. Nothing. The standard protocols that connected her to the palace at all times had been severed. A pounding at the door preceded Captain Elia's urgent entry. "Your Radiance, we've lost contact with Imperial Center. Our long-range sensors detect massive energy discharges consistent with military activity in the capital system." The diplomatic summit suddenly seemed like a perfectly orchestrated trap. "Prepare the shuttle for immediate departure," she commanded. "The Centauri representatives left during the night cycle," Kieran noted. "All of them." Thalia's mind raced through possibilities. "Dorian," she concluded. He's positioned himself perfectly, military command, imperial bloodline, and I'm conveniently off-world during a crisis. A coup, Kieran confirmed grimly. Their return journey was tense and dangerous. Long-range communications remained blocked, but fragmented transmissions painted a disturbing picture. Admiral Dorian had declared a state of emergency, claiming the Empress had been compromised by Centauri influence. He'd named himself Regent Protector until the security situation could be resolved. He'll have monitoring systems watching for the Imperial shuttle, Kieran warned as they approached the capital world. Then we don't use Imperial channels, Thalia decided. She turned to Elias. Captain, your family estate in the southern continent, could we land there undetected? The agricultural fields could accommodate our shuttle, your radiance. Do it, she ordered. As they descended through the atmosphere on a stealth approach, automated defense systems suddenly locked onto them. Proximity alert, missile launch detected, the pilot shouted. Evasive maneuvers, Elias commanded. The shuttle lurched violently as it attempted to avoid incoming fire. A deafening explosion rocked the vessel as one missile grazed their shields. We're losing altitude control, the pilot reported, attempting emergency landing procedures. The impact was brutal. Thalia felt herself thrown against restraints before something solid struck her head. Through the haze of pain, she saw Kieran struggling toward her, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Stay with me, he urged, freeing her from the crushed seating. She fought to remain conscious as he half-carried her from the wreckage. Captain Elias and 2 guards had survived, pulling emergency supplies from the burning shuttle. We need to move, Elias said. That crash will bring investigation teams. They fled into dense forest as the sound of approaching vessels grew louder. Kieran supported Thalia, his arm firm around her waist. Your shoulder, she noticed, seeing the awkward angle and the darkening fabric of his sleeve. Dislocated, he admitted. Nothing critical. They had covered several kilometers when the whine of search drones echoed through the canopy. A sudden burst of weapons fire erupted behind them. Elias and the guards returned fire, creating cover. Go, Elias shouted to Kieran. Get her to safety, we'll hold them here. Elias, I order you to come with us, Thalia commanded. With respect, your radiance, you need time we can provide. His loyal eyes met hers one final time. It has been my honor. Kieran pulled her away as the captain and guards engaged the pursuers in a hopeless battle. The sounds of combat faded behind them as they pushed deeper into unfamiliar territory. Night fell, bringing dangerous cold. They found shelter in an abandoned mining structure, Thalia using her limited medical training to treat Kieran's shoulder. I've never seen this side of my empire, she admitted, looking around at the decrepit building. These conditions. The parts rulers don't usually see, Kieran said through gritted teeth as she reset his shoulder with a sickening pop. Once the immediate danger had passed, reality crashed down upon her. My empire has fallen. Dorian controls the military, the palace, the communication networks. Not fallen, Kieran corrected. Wounded, but we're still standing. Thalia looked at him in the dim light. Why are you still here? You could have escaped during the crash, disappeared. Kieran's hand found hers in the darkness. Because for the first time in my life, something matters more than freedom. As she leaned against him for warmth, Thalia realized the cruel irony. She had lost an empire but gained something she never knew she needed. Tomorrow they would begin the dangerous journey to the capital's underworld, where Kieran's smuggler connections might provide the foundation for her resistance. Tonight, in this forgotten corner of her realm, the Empress of 56 worlds was simply a woman fighting for survival with the man who had become her most unlikely ally. The capital's undercity existed in perpetual twilight, a shadowy realm beneath the gleaming towers where imperial power rarely reached. For 3 weeks, Thalia had hidden here among smugglers, outcasts, and forgotten citizens, people who lived under her rule yet had never truly been seen by her. You've built quite the coalition, she remarked to Kieran as they entered the abandoned manufacturing facility that served as their headquarters. Former criminals worked alongside loyal military officers who had escaped Dorian's purges. Technicians repurposed industrial equipment into communication scramblers, while intelligence operatives analyzed Dorian's movements. Not me, Kieran corrected. You did this, they follow the Empress. They follow a woman they've come to know, she said. not an untouchable figure on a crystal throne. The facility hummed with activity as their final plans took shape. Dorian had scheduled his formal coronation, convinced the Empress had perished in the shuttle crash. It would be their only opportunity to strike. The latest intelligence confirms security patterns, reported Commander Vega, one of the few high-ranking officers who had remained loyal. Dorian has concentrated forces around the palace perimeter, but the underground maintenance tunnels remain lightly guarded. Because he doesn't believe anyone would dare infiltrate through waste management systems, Kieran added with a smirk. Fortunately, getting into places I shouldn't is my specialty. Thalia studied the holographic layout. Once inside, we'll need to reach the central communications hub. From there, we can broadcast the truth to all 56 worlds simultaneously. And the military support? Vega asked. General Oris commands the 7th Fleet, Thalia replied. She strategically positioned her vessels just beyond sensor range, awaiting our signal. As their team made final preparations, Kieran pulled Thalia aside to a private alcove. There's something I need to say before tomorrow. The vulnerability in his expression caught her off guard. This was not the cocky smuggler who had stood before her throne months ago. If things go wrong, he began. They won't, she interrupted. If they do, he insisted, I need you to know that meeting you was worth everything that followed, even the death sentence. His hand gently traced her cheek. Especially what followed the death sentence. Thalia leaned into his touch. When this is over, there can be no formal place for you beside an empress. You understand that? I've never had a formal place anywhere, he replied with a hint of his familiar smile. But I've found where I belong. Dawn brought their moment of truth. Disguised as maintenance workers, their infiltration team navigated the putrid tunnels beneath the palace. Kieran led the way, disabling security measures with practiced efficiency. Fitting that we return through the sewers, Thalia murmured. Dorian's betrayal has reduced the Imperium to waste. They emerged in the lower levels of the palace as celebration sounds echoed from the throne room above. Dorian's coronation had begun. The team split as planned, Vega's soldiers securing escape routes while Thalia, Kieran, and a small strike team headed for the communications center. They encountered minimal resistance until alarms suddenly blared throughout the complex. We've been detected, Kieran warned as they rounded a corner to find an Imperial security squad blocking their path. What followed was chaos, blaster fire, hand-to-hand combat, and desperate maneuvering through palace corridors. Thalia fought with unexpected ferocity, her enhanced biology giving her advantages even Kieran hadn't witnessed before. They reached the communications hub bloodied but victorious. As technicians worked frantically to override security protocols, Dorian's voice echoed through the palace announcing his ascension. Broadcast in 60 seconds, the lead technician reported. Suddenly the doors burst open. Dorian himself stood there, flanked by elite guards, rage contorting his aristocratic features. Cousin, he snarled, I should have ensured your death personally. You always underestimated what you didn't understand, Thalia replied calmly, including the loyalty of those you dismissed. Kieran moved protectively toward Thalia as Dorian raised his sidearm. The shot that followed seemed to unfold in slow motion, Kieran lunging forward, the energy blast striking him instead of the Empress. No, Thalia's cry tore through the chamber as Kieran collapsed. What happened next would become legend across 56 worlds. The Empress's fury manifested in a display of power few had witnessed. Her augmented biology, combined with raw emotion, transformed her into something beyond human as she incapacitated Dorian and his guards single-handedly. When the palace security feeds broadcast across the Empire moments later, citizens witnessed not only Dorian's treachery exposed, but also the image of their Empress cradling a wounded human, tears streaming down her face for the first time in her reign. Recovery took months, both for Kieran and for the Imperium. Dorian's collaborators were removed from power, but Thalia's approach to restoration surprised many. Rather than returning to isolated rule, she established a new Council of Worlds with representatives from across the Empire, including the undercity populations she had come to understand. And beside her, not as consort or subject, but as special diplomatic envoy to independent systems, stood a former smuggler whose irreverent smile now brought warmth rather than offense to the imperial court. The empress who rules 56 worlds, Kieran mused one night as they stood on the palace balcony overlooking the capital. Yet shares her heart with one. Not shares, Thalia corrected, her fingers intertwining with his. You simply showed me it was there all along. Above them, stars glittered, the same stars that had witnessed an empire falter and strengthen, and an untouchable empress discover that the greatest power comes not from ruling worlds, but from allowing oneself to be truly seen.